everyone. I am Maya. I'm an executive editor at Dutton, part of Penguin Random House, and I'm so excited to be chatting with these authors. We're going to start with a little one-on-one between me and all the authors, and then we'll move into a group Q&A. So, Robert, can I ask you to unmute and put your camera on? Hi.
Hi.
Can I ask you to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and a quick snapshot of your journey toward publication?
Sure. My name is Robert Jones Jr. I am born and raised in New York City. I will be releasing my very first novel, The Prophets, in January. And I'm not ashamed to say that 3 months after that, I'll be turning 50 years old. I have always loved to write ever since I was a little kid. I'm a comic book collector. So I used to write comic book stories where I was the only boy allowed on Paradise Island in Wonder Woman's world. And that is how I kind of fell in love with writing. And then I began to go to the libraries, and librarians played a really big role in kind of supporting me in my journey to reading and writing. And it was difficult at times to think of myself in these terms, because I come from a blue-collar family and writing seems more like a hobby than something that you could actually grow up and become. But despite trying several different professions, I kept coming back to writing because it was what I feel is my purpose. And so here I am.
Not to sound like a stalker, you also have a presence on social media, and
I do. I am the creator of Son of Baldwin, which began as a tribute to James Baldwin, someone who has influenced me greatly in my literary pursuits. It is a place where we get to discuss all sorts of socio-political issues, whether that's race or sexuality or gender identity or disability, whatever it may be. We have really sometimes very difficult discussions there, hoping to kind of foster a community where we can solve some of the problems that we're encountering like right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I let you go, do you want to give everyone, if you have it, like the 1 or 2 sentence snapshot of The Prophets?
Yes. The Prophets for me was a way to re-examine our past in terms of antebellum slavery, as well as African history, to reinsert the Black queer figure into a narrative in which they've been erased. Prophets is my attempt to do that.
It's an amazing novel, and I'm so excited for it to be out.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I will call you back on in a little bit when we all chat.
Okay.
Sabaa, if you don't mind coming on camera next. Hi. Same questions, I'm afraid. Do you mind telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your publishing journey?
Sure. My name is actually Sabaa. It rhymes with Baba.
Okay.
I have to say that a lot. So.
No, thank you for correcting me.
Oh, no problem. I actually should have mentioned it before, but there was never a moment. I started writing when I was a little kid, but I'm South Asian, and so my parents were very much like, so you're going to be a doctor. And then I was in high school when I realized like that's probably not a great idea. It wasn't really the world for me. So I went into journalism instead. And I worked at the Washington Post as a copy editor on the international desk. And while I was there, I read these stories from Kashmir and Sudan and Congo and Liberia and Iraq and Afghanistan and all these countries that were really heartrending stories about extrajudicial jailings and child soldiers and bombings and just really hard things, genocide, like all these things that overwhelmingly seem to affect people of color. And I started asking myself, like, you know, what would I do if I was in some of these situations? In particular, a story out of Kashmir about women whose brothers and fathers and sons are taken by the local military and disappeared. So I started asking, like, what would happen if that was me? And that's really what the question that Ember rose out of. The mythology of the book is inspired by Pakistan, which is where my family is from, and as well as South Asia, the Middle East and North Africa. The jinn mythology is prevalent in all of those places. So that is where the mythology came from, and really from stories that my mom told me when I was a kid. So I worked on Ember for 6 years, which is a long time, but you know, I had 2 children and multiple cross-country moves. So I feel like those are good excuses for why it's so long.
Yes, definitely.
And I am now, in December, going to release the 4th book in the series, which is called A Sky Beyond the Storm.
I just have to say, I can't wait. I'm a total fangirl of the series.
Yay.
So,
Thank you.
I actually, Julian, who organized the panel, she was like, maybe we can get advanced copies, and she's like, not yet. So anyway, I will read it with everyone else.
Not quite done. I'm sorry, but I also don't think there's any arcs this time around because I've been a real grump about it. So poor Penguin has had to put up with me being a lunatic and being like, it's not done. You can't show it to anyone.
I just personally can't wait. And if anyone watching hasn't checked them out, they're amazing. Thanks. I'm looking forward to chatting more a little bit later.
All right.
Thanks. Jasmine, do you mind coming on screen next?
Hello.
Hey. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Good. Do you want to tell everyone about your wonderful books and your journey to publishing?
Yeah, so I just in June released my 5th book, Party of Two. That book and all of my books so far have been romance novels through Berkeley, which is a division of Penguin Random House. And I grew up as a big reader, but not as a writer. I was not one of the people who wrote when they were little. I think partly because I just didn't see other writers out there who looked like me. I love so many books, but there weren't, like when I was a little girl, there weren't a lot of books about little girls who looked like me. And so I just didn't really think of myself as a person who could become a writer. And I always wanted to be a lawyer, partly I think because I knew other Black women who were lawyers, and that seemed like a thing that I could be. So I went to college and went to law school, was a lawyer for a while, and then realized I was missing a creative outlet in my life. And that's when I started writing, and I loved it. Like, I was so excited to come home every night and write. And so I wrote, one book that I tried to get published with and didn't succeed. And then another book that I sort of halfway wrote. And then I paused for a while. And then I started writing The Wedding Date, which is my first book. And I had so much fun writing in that book. And that's the book that got me my agent and my publishing deal. And so I've been writing ever since.
Your books are just as fun to read as they are for you to write them.
Thank you.
Well, I'm looking forward to chatting more with you in a little bit. Last but not least, Raphael, do you want to come on screen?
Hello! I'm
Hi.
Raphael.
Yay!
Here I am.
Well, in our little kind of pre-chat, you mentioned the word sideways in terms of your publishing journey. So
Yes.
just to set you
I
up.
think well, it sounds like everyone kind of came into it sideways. It doesn't sound like there's anyone who's like, yes, I applied for the professional author job straight out of high school, and then I worked my way up until I was publishing my book. But I also feel like I fell into it sideways. I was living in New York, and I posted a piece on Craigslist, and the Craigslist Missed Connections board. I wrote a fictional magical magically realist story as a missed connections piece. And it kind of went a little viral at the time. The people were passing around like, what is this thing? This is this beautiful little tone poem disguised as a Craigslist missed connection. And because of that, I got a little bit of attention. And an agent emailed me and said, I'm obsessed with this. Do you have a book? What can we do? So like, oh my God, sure, maybe I could write a book. And I actually been writing short stories just on my own for nobody but myself. So I sent her, I think like 3 or 4 stories. I thought, I think this might be the beginning of the book. Like, do you think this could be a book? And I had a meeting with her, and she's at the top of this very tall building in Manhattan. And I had to like, put on a tie, and I was very nervous and excited. And she goes, I have to tell you, I read your stories. I don't think you have a book. Oh, no. I said, oh, okay. So yeah, I love your thing, but the rest of these, I don't think it's ready. I said, oh, okay. And so then I got in the elevator and went back down. And then I was like, all right, I guess I don't have a book. And so I put those stories away. And then instead I wrote a TV show called BoJack Horseman. And I spent years doing that. And then because I made this show, I think some people at Knopf were fans of the show. And so they reached out to my agents to say, hey, we like his show. Does he have a book? And so then CAA, which is where I was at the time, set me up with a different agent at the same agency, Molly Glick. And she said, hey, do you have any book? I said, well, I have these stories. And she read the exact same stories. And she said, yeah, I think this could be a book. And from there, we were off to the races. And then I wrote this book called Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory, which is a book of short stories, including that original Craigslist Misconnections piece.
It's so much fun to read.
Well, thank you.
And I think that story is a common one in publishing where, people just say it takes just the right agent or editor to
just
get
the
a
right
book.
person at just the right time. And if you can't do that, just make a TV show.
Exactly. Simple. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to ask everyone to come on camera and we can all chat a little bit more about publishing and writing. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
I want to start with a question I confess I really want to know the answer to. Mentorship played such a big role in my own journey to becoming an editor, and I was wondering if mentorship played a role in your own paths toward publication, whether it was a teacher or someone, a publishing professional, other author, etc.
I can start with this one. For me, it's not, I was thinking about this because it's not so much mentorship as other people who I now sort of think of as my colleagues who did that for me, right? Like other authors who were maybe a step or 2 or 3 steps ahead of me in the process have been the ones who were most helpful for me. So, people who had already had agents when I was looking for an agent, people who already had deals when I was looking for a deal, like all of that stuff, because I think when you're much farther along, you don't remember what it's like to have no idea of any of this, because so much of publishing just has a different language that I am still learning. And, this is, my first book came out 2.5 years ago, right? And so I've been doing this for 3 years. And there's still some times where I'm like, I don't know what that term means. But I think when you're just a few steps ahead, you remember what it's like to not know what that stuff means and to be able to explain all the little stuff. And so those are the people now who I'm in constant group chats with, right? Complaining, I don't know, I'm sorry I started out with complaining, but sometimes it's just complaining about things or being able to be excited about something that, in publishing, things aren't public for 6 months to a year and you can talk about that. all of those stuff, like those are the people who pump me up on a daily basis that I can pump up. And so those are the people that I feel like I have gotten the most from, because it's that like, or you can ask the like stupid questions too, you know, sometimes like, especially early on. Now I've worked with my agent long enough that I can ask her a bunch of those questions, but early on I was like, I don't know what this means, but I don't want to look stupid. And so I could ask people like, what does this mean? And like, those are the relationships that have been the most helpful, I think.
For me, it's kind of been like a road that diverged. So you have on one end, the writing aspect of it. And my undergraduate professors were very crucial in helping me to, one, believe that I'm a writer. And two, to make sure that I was writing at the best of my ability, and that I kept writing, and that I realized that whatever obstacles I might come across, that I still needed to continue to write. But then when you get to publishing, it's very much like Jasmine said, you really have to seek the people who have some sort of knowledge, but are not too far ahead of you in terms of guiding you through those first processes that you're going through to determine, okay, how do I go from having this manuscript to having it published? Because you don't know any of those steps. No, there's no one there to tell you any of those things unless you seek out those individuals. But for me, my mentors were all academic. They were all my college professors. That really helped.
I would second what Jasmine said, that the people within the industry are so important. But for me, I think similar to Jasmine, that was after my books actually got published, and I was trying to navigate, you know, pre-publication and then post-publication, and I didn't know anything. And just having these really lovely and wonderful authors, you know, reach out or, you know, offer to help has really encouraged me to try to do the same for debut authors. But in terms of a mentor, the person who really sticks out is my older brother. He's been mentoring me since birth, basically. But he's my first reader. You know, we worked together on a lot of projects too. And while I never really connected with any sort of like professional mentor or, you know, academic mentor, like I always wanted one, because I feel like that's what you would see in the movies, like the mentor montage, right? But I never had that. I had my brother, and he really helped guide me, just in terms of not necessarily like, oh, this is how you write or this is how you don't, but this is how you believe in yourself. And this is how you keep going when you really don't want to. And this is how you tell mom and dad that you want to be a writer, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I would say he's probably been the most effective mentor I've had.
Can I ask, is he one of your first readers, or does he read later in the process?
Yeah, no, he reads everything first. So he read Sky first. He reads multiple drafts, poor guy. You know, he reads everything that I've done. He's the first one to get it. Usually, and he's also the person I call at 2 a.m. to be like, I didn't be doing this, you know, like that's him. Sorry, brother.
I would also echo what the others are saying, and that for me, in my career, I found less important than mentors is the idea of your peers and the people that are at your level, or maybe one step ahead, but are kind of where you are, because, you know, those people are going to rise up with you. And that, you know, I remember being in my 20s and looking at people in their late 20s or early 30s that I felt like were where I wanted my career to be, and thought like, oh, they're not going to waste their time with me, but there are other people, you know, at my level. And then, you know, 5 or 6 years later, then we were right there where I wanted to be. And the people that, you know, were getting the coffee for the executives that I wanted to work with ended up being the executives that I ended up working with.
Right.
Right. And the people that I looked up to were never going to read my writing and give me notes on it. But the people who are at my level were eager to read my writing and give me notes, and for me to read their writing and give them feedback. So that has been much more helpful for me in my development, is finding the people kind of like me at my level. I'm curious for the other writers, because TV is such a collaborative writing medium. So it's very easy to meet other writers and work with other writers, but book writing is so solitary and individual. I'm wondering how you people have met friends and peers, and how do you form those relationships? Is it through workshops or classes or mixers?
Social media.
For me, it hasn't been through any of those things, because I've never done any formal writing education. For me, I feel like the two major places that I've met other writers are the internet, and then book conferences and writing events. I have once I thinking fondly, because we don't get that this year, of the green room at the LA Festival of Books, where all the authors are there sort of waiting in between their panels, and you meet people and someone introduces you to someone else, or you're on a panel with someone, and then you kind of realize oh, we like each other, in that way. And then you exchange email addresses, and then you become friends. And those are the ways that I've really met other writers. And, some of my best writing friendships started, with the internet. Either we followed each other on Twitter or Instagram or something, and then slowly started sending messages, and then exchange text messages, and then started texting all the time. And then met each other in person at some point when we were each traveling or we lived in the same city. Those are the ways that I've met other writers for the most part.
Young adult has these things called debut groups. I don't know if adult adult publishing has them, but basically everyone who's debuting in a year will join this group, and we all kind of get to know each other because we're all going through the same weird experiences together. And I would say all my closest writing friends are still the people who I met in that debut group, and who
so
we
cool.
survived together. We survived the early years together.
It's we're the class of this year.
Yeah, it had a really dorky name too, and it's actually very fun. And you talk to the people who have gone before you, they interview you, you talk to the people the year who comes after you. It's sort of a weird, almost a little internship type thing, except you don't, the work is already done, you've written the book. It's really wonderful.
That sounds wonderful. I don't know if I've heard of that in adult publishing, but
yeah, we need more of that.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Well, speaking of, I know for myself, when people, I get this all the time, people say, oh, you're an editor, you must read all day. Is there any part of the publishing process you had in your mind as one way that turned out to be not that way when it came time for reality?
I had no idea you'd have to talk to people so much. I really didn't. I was you write the book, you put the book in the world, and then you get to go back to your writing cave and continue to write, and you don't have to deal with humanoids. But that's not true. Not even close to true. Now we don't really have to, but panels and events and conferences and festivals and social media and Instagram DMs, I was not anticipating that.
For me, it was the reaction of the industry to my manuscript. I thought everyone would hate it. I thought that I would just get rejections left and right. No one would ever dream of publishing this book, and the response was the exact opposite. People were really, really excited about it, because I had heard such horror stories from even brilliant writers like Marlon James. Said his first manuscript was rejected 69 times. So I was terrified that it was going to be rejected, and that's not what happened. So I was unnerved by that, because I had built myself up for the pain of rejection, and that was not what I experienced. So I was thrown for a loop.
That's a happy loop, it sounds like.
I think I didn't know how much there was to it, right? I just sort of thought you turn in a book and then you get edits and you do the edits and that's and then you're done and then a book comes out. But there are just so many steps along the process and so many different people who work for a publishing company. Like I would get these emails from my editor about like art, you know, with the big A, or like sales with the big S, and I was like, who's that? Like, what does that mean? Who is sales? You know, like there's so many different, like publicity and marketing. What's the difference between them? I can still only sort of tell you that. So like all of that, like those are the things where I was like, there's this whole industry, which, you know, I knew that, but I didn't really know all of the things that went into one little book coming out into the world.
I would, my experience, I think, is somewhat similar to Robert's surprise, that I was expecting that people wouldn't like what I wrote. I thought that I think, especially coming from the world of TV, that the book industry as a whole would view me as an interloper, or like, oh, look at this guy, he thinks he can write a book because he writes a TV show. And then my experience has been the opposite. It's been very welcoming, and that I go to bookstores or I go to events like this, and everyone's just like, yes, you are an author now. You are a real author. You are not just someone pretending to be an author. You wrote a book. That's all it takes. Congratulations, you are one of us. And it's felt very warm and inclusive in a really wonderful way, and I've really enjoyed that experience. It's been much, yeah, I've seen much less, I guess, snobbery than I expected from book people, but maybe that was unfair on my part. Maya, I'm curious, your example saying, you know, oh, you must read all day. Do you not read all day? I'm hearing of this.
Kind of to Jasmine's point, I email marketing and publicity, and production's the big department. I think my authors just know them as, I'm always like, no, we can't do that because we're going to come up against deadlines. I think production's the department they really get to know, and maybe not with the best connotations all the time. Yes, no, it's a lot of emails and kind of the publishing of the books versus the kind of reading and and I'm actually curious if you all have that experience too, of when my inbox is active, it's really hard to shut it off and kind of do the deeper work of reading and editing, which I guess parlays to the writing process for you all, and how honestly you find the time and space to do it, especially these days.
I
feel like having, go, please.
I think that's partly why, I mean, I think there's some people who are good at like, I'm going to turn off everything and just write in the middle of the day. And I'm not good at that. So I think that's why most of my actual writing time is like after business hours, because I know I'm not going to like, especially if, you know, sometimes things are quiet, right? And I'm not in the middle of emailing people about certain things or whatever. But I have a hard time turning off my brain to, because I feel like there are two different things that you have to do, is like be a writer and be an author. And so when I'm in like the author mode, it's hard to switch. Like, you know, I'm in like, if it's business time, I'm trying to like email something with my publicist and figure out something, or like talk to my editor about this or whatever. And so I'm not like, my mind isn't in creative mode. And so I have to like wait for those emails to stop and then switch. There are people who do that first thing in the morning before anything starts. I am not one of those people. I envy them. But.
Jasmine, that's such a great way to put it, that there's the writer and there's the author. I, for example, cannot write anything that isn't somewhat related to the business of the profit right now. Like, so if it's not about the profits, like if it's about the second novel or whatever, I can't even deal with it right now. But if my publicist is asking me to write an essay about my journey to publishing with the profits, that I can do even if I'm watching I May Destroy You on television and my cat is annoying me and my husband is telling me to come downstairs to eat, I can still do that, but I cannot do anything outside of that project.
Yeah, I think there's always 100 things you could be doing instead of writing. and it's really hard to create the space around yourself and to do that work, you know. And I think for, you know, some people, I think, have the impression like, oh, if you're a writer, you just like write, you know, you just have like a notebook on the subway, you're just always writing, like between things, you know, while you're waiting in line for the bathroom, and maybe some people can do that, but I need to like get in a zone. I need to like push everything else away and just like, this is my time to just do that. And it's hard to create that time, especially, yeah, when you are, you know, selling your previous thing, or you know, in the midst of a lockdown because of a global pandemic that has completely disrupted your routine. I mean, I'll confess that since March, I haven't written anything. Like nothing. I don't know where the days go. They fill up with things that I need to do, and I have a to-do list that I'm constantly knocking things off of. And one of those things is always write, and I never quite get there. I mean, I've written some great tweets, don't get me wrong, but I otherwise there's not been a productive quarantine for me.
I actually am one of those people who writes between things. I call them elbows.
That's amazing.
You know, it was necessity, I think, for me. So I had my kids when I was relatively young, and I wrote so much of Ember when they were babies. And you know, I didn't have, you know, help, or I didn't have a lot of help. I had family who would help out or what have you. But the only way to get the book done was to write in these elbows of time, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I'd be nursing, I would talk into my phone, I would be driving, you know, to work, and I would be talking into my phone, and then I would transcribe it later. And I think that that actually helped a lot in forcing me to just make things work, even if I didn't have the mental space. And I'm thankful for that. And now it's sort of funny, because then for a few years I had the space. I was a full-time writer. I was like, this is awesome. Like, I can just walk into my office and do this for a living. It's amazing. I will never take it for granted. But then obviously the pandemic hit, and then I was educating my children. And so now it's very much like, okay, you know, the first half of the day when they're sort of my responsibility, I am like, okay, I can only do emails and publicity stuff and, you know, like that sort of thing. And then when my husband takes over and I have my writing time, that's when I'm like, okay, now it's time to write. And then ultimately I never get it done. Very similar to you, Raphael. Like, I never get to where I need to be. So, you know, I wait for everyone to go to bed, and then I'm up until 3 a.m. And that is when I do my best writing. It's at like 3 a.m.
Sabaa, your story sounds like Toni Morrison's.
Oh yeah. That's great inspiration. Wow. Okay.
Good company to be in. Not bad.
Yeah, very good company.
You're all reminding me, I meant to start the panel. I don't know if any of you have listened to any Fresh Airs during this time, but Terry Gross's first question is always like, so-and-so, how are you? So I meant to start the panel with that, just to acknowledge that we're all on Zoom and we're just in very unprecedented times. So thank you all for being here extra, because I think showing up to anything takes a little more effort these days.
The traffic was not a problem at all.
Yeah.
That's the nice thing. It really was really easy to get here tonight. So.
And I've been reading more about how people are now simulating commuting, because they actually are starting to miss that time. So people, I read an article, someone will walk around the block listening to podcasts to try to simulate getting that time.
That's not bad. You need a transition to get into your workday. I think that's pretty smart, actually.
Well, I think everyone has really great backdrops. I'll just say that. Looks good. So for those of you who have published several books, this partly is exactly what we're talking about, or are in the process of publishing a book, can you kind of keep two projects going at once, or is it all focus on the book that's coming out? And
so I was thinking about that when Robert was talking about like only being able to concentrate on the profit right now. I'm usually working on something new when a book comes out. And so I have always kind of, at first it was kind of accidentally, I would take a break from what I was working on during, you know, like in this sort of 2 weeks around my launch. And And I felt guilty about that because it was like, I should be working. I was, you know, because I was like traveling for book tour. I have all this empty time in hotel rooms. Like, why am I not working? But after a few times doing it, I realized like, no, I just don't have the mental space to like be doing something now. I am concentrating on the current book that I am promoting. I have to like let that book back into my head. Like I can't do it both at once. And so, and even this time, I mean, even though I knew this and had been through that thought process, this time when a book came out, I was like, oh, well, it'll be easy to keep working on the, you know, the current thing because I'm not going anywhere. I'm still doing all of this from my living room, but it, like, I still had to take a break because I have to, you know, there's sometimes when you can multitask, but for that, I just have to focus on the one thing. And so I had to like have my mind all in like one book at a time when I'm doing that. But, you know, in the sort of pre-publication time, I'm usually kind of juggling back and forth, and that's hard but necessary. But there's certain times where I just have to focus on one thing.
I try to do a couple projects at once, but I cheat on my books like a lot. So I'll be working on one thing, my editor will be like, good, it's coming in, that's great. And then I'll get this other idea and I'm like, oh, but you're so much prettier. And so then I'll go and I'll work on this other idea. And that happened in the midst of Sky. I was working on Sky, and then my publisher left, and then my editor left. And so I kind of didn't know like where I was in terms of like when I would get a new editor and everything. And so I just started working on this other idea I had, and I told my agent about it. I was like, hey, I'm kind of cheating on Sky right now. And she was like, well, you're going to be like really annoying until you just get this idea out of your head. So just go and do it. And then, you know, I'll deal with sort of the fallout of it. And it just had to be that way. The idea came, it took over. I don't know. It was like a toddler. Like it just took over the whole, the space in my brain. And that was it. So, and then I have sort of, again, kind of been forced to, I usually have too many deadlines, and I really should learn to spread them out more, but I don't learn that lesson. And so then everything is due at once. And so then I have to work on everything.
I think I love what Sabaa said about cheating on your own work, because I think that was for me the joy of writing the short stories, is I could be working on multiple ones at once. And if I ever felt like I was hitting a wall with one or you know, like a block, like I can't figure this one out, there was always something I could distract myself with. And that's, I mean, for me, I have ADD, and that's one of my secrets to being productive is find ways to distract yourself with other things that are also productive, other things you need to be doing. So you're not doing the thing you should be doing, but at least you're doing the other thing that you also should be doing. And so it's nice to have different projects like that you can jump to. You know, one thing I struggle with though, to Jasmine, your point earlier about, you know, letting yourself off the hook for not being able to write at certain moments. I think that's true, you know, whether you're on tour or just also like there's so many hours in the day. And if you eventually, you know, you're going to hit a wall at some point in the day where it's better to go for a walk, clear your head, spend time with your family, watch I May Destroy You, you know, allow your brain to fill up with other stuff. And I think, you know, one of my struggles is freeing myself of the guilt that I should be writing more, while also not letting myself off the hook too much, because sometimes like, no, you should be writing more. Like stop, get back to work, right? And like, how do you manage that for yourself? I think is a challenge.
I always feel an extreme amount of guilt if I'm not productive in terms of my writing. I always, again, to mention Toni Morrison, I always go back to her, and you know, because one of the things about this time that we're in right now is that it's so anxiety inducing, and I'm always my nerves are shot about everything from the pandemic to the November election, that I sometimes feel like I can't do it. But Toni Morrison said that this is the exact time that I should be doing it. This is what artists are for. So I always feel that pressure. So I force myself to write something, even if it's just a paragraph or a thought or what have you. I force myself to write something just so that I cannot feel guilty that if I'm given this gift, then I must use it, you know?
I recently realized that, because I think I also, like many of us, are having the constant anxiety right now. And so I recently was like, you know what? I'm just gonna sit here and be anxious anyway. So I might as well get some work done first. And then I'm not anxious about my work and everything else. And so that sort of helped me, because I was like, all right, I'm just gonna get this over with now. And then at least I could have had the work done, and then I could just wallow in the anxiety for everything else, and it's fine. So that was sort of a helpful, like, little sort of pep talk to give myself.
I'm going a little off script, but you just inspired me, Jasmine. What's everyone's like happy place right now? Whether it's a I mean, are you kind of finding social media is a place to go to burn off some steam, or exercise, cooking?
Social
Cooking,
media is terrible right now. I have been cooking a lot.
Yeah.
Although this week, I mean, I feel like we all hit walls with different things, you know, throughout this time. And so this week has been one of those, like, please don't, I'm tired of even just the concept of food, like, this week. But I have been, like, there have been weeks where I, like, bake something every day. And then, I mean, and then have to, you know, give it away to, like, random family members somewhere, because I cannot eat 5 loaves of bread.
I wish we lived closer, Jasmine.
I live pretty close to you, so I'm.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I have been gardening.
Oh, me too. I've been gardening too. Yeah, that's a joy.
Oh, lovely.
My aunt, my favorite aunt Jandel, is really into health. She's a nutritionist, so she's always encouraging me to grow my own food and stuff like that. So I've been just growing food and flowers and tending to the plants out in the front yard, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And that has really, really helped. It's so calming for those moments that I'm doing it.
And it does, like, the thing that gardening has been for me is it forces me to go outside, which, like, we all, you know, sometimes we need to see, like, oh, there is another world out there that is not just the 4 walls that I live within. So then I'm like, oh yes, okay, I'm outside in the world, and here's a new leaf from that seed that I planted like a month ago, and, you know, it's nice.
I've been I made a little Lego village here in my office, and I got really into Legos for a while. I think I've moved off that a little bit now. It's kind of creepy how many Lego buildings I have. But I did jigsaw puzzles for a while too. I think, and both those things, I think, are similar to gardening. I think what's nice about those things is they utilize your hands in a way that you can't be looking at your phone, or you can't be looking at the internet. And I think that is such an energy suck. And it's good to do things that force you to not be doing that. I think, especially as a creative, you know, if you are writing and you feel like you've hit a wall and you don't know what to do next, it can be very tempting, just like, yeah, let me just scroll through social media for a while. But you're not regenerating anything in that time. You're taking more stuff in. Or if you're watching TV or even reading other books, which sometimes can be inspiring and helpful, you're taking stuff in. And there's something nice about finding activities that force you to not take stuff in, that force you to use your hands, and then your brain can, like, do math in the background and will figure stuff out. So then when you're sitting down to write again, all of a sudden you've made connections you don't even realize. But I think even if you're not a writer, it can be helpful to put the internet away and find something to do with your hands, or find an excuse to get outside.
Yeah, screens are, I think, a problem for everybody.
I have, my favorite time right now is Monday and Thursday nights, because that's reading night in my family. So the 4 of us will sit at the table for dinner, and we won't talk, we'll just read. Everyone has a book, and you just sit and you read. And it's like, my 8-year-old reads Dogman, because Dogman is fantastic, and the 11-year-old reads whatever he's reading. And, you know, it's such a peaceful, like, 25, 30 minutes, you know, however long it takes us to eat dinner. And it's very quiet, and it's very companionable. You know, no one's asking for anything, you know, it's not work related. We're just reading whatever makes us happy. it's become my favorite time, like all week. It's really lovely.
That's a lovely idea.
That-
I might steal that. That's so
That fills me
cool.
with calm. Thank you. Like, well, social media has come up a lot, and it's something I think about all the time. And writers, not all, but a lot of writers are on Twitter a lot. So I'm a broad topic, but I guess we can hone in on maybe suggestions for aspiring writers, any kind of do's or don'ts about writing Twitter, or how best to use it as a platform for good and connection.
Don't make jokes that people are going to find in 10 years and get you in trouble for. That feels like a no-brainer, but I feel like people are still need to hear that.
Yeah.
Because you might have very few followers now, but in 10 years, you might be a name that people will look back through your history. So be aware of that.
I think knowing what you want social media to be for you is really helpful. You know, is it something you're using to talk to friends? Or do you do that by texting them or calling them on the phone, right? Or DMing them, right? Is it something you're using just for promotion? Okay, that's fine too. Is it something where you go to blow off steam? I think understanding what social media is to you then helps you kind of put it in its place, right? So if it's really something that you're using just to occasionally spout off about whatever, then you kind of know that you really shouldn't be looking at it all day, because that's not what it is to you. If it's something, you know, I have friends who are in the media, and social media is a huge part of their work. They kind of constantly have to be tweeting. They have to have the next hot take. That's what social media is for them. So it's a big part of their job. And I think that for a lot of authors, I think some of us think it's more important than maybe it really needs to be. I think that we can maybe sometimes step back from it and let it be something that's not as sort of huge in our view. But really, just I think asking that question is helpful. I found it helpful particularly recently, and kind of being like, okay, I do this for this amount of time, and then I kind of put it away and I don't really look at it because that's not what it's for in my life.
Yeah, I think especially early on, it's very helpful to follow a bunch of different writers and who use social media in very different ways to kind of know what options there are out there, right? Because I think a lot of times you think, oh, well, I have to get a lot of followers and then do it this way and then blah, blah, blah. And that's like, people use social media in so many different ways, and that can be perfectly fine for all of the people involved. You just have to know what's right for you. And so I think it's really helpful to have a number of different kinds of people that you're following, so you know, so you have examples and you know what there is out there, and then you can kind of figure out what kind of place it has in your life. Like, I know, I have done met so many different writers because of social media, which I think is wonderful. But I kind of I started long before I was trying to publish. And so I went in with the idea that I was going to follow interesting people and maybe make friends. And then that's what happened. And then some of those people are my closest friends now. And so I use it in a much different way now than I used to. But that's okay. I think you just have to figure it out and pay attention and listen to what other people say before making big decisions, before thinking it has to be one way or another. And you can approach different platforms in different ways. I know many people who do that.
I always approached social media as a platform to discuss political ideas. So that's in almost inherently toxic in some ways. For me, the biggest lesson for me has been not to forget that you're talking to other people, that they're actually living people, that some of these people who say these really outrageous and offensive things are 13 years old. That you're not really, you don't want to go in it with this idea that you have to take down this other person, and they're horrible and they're mean and they're just awful, because sometimes that's a kid you're talking to. But on the other hand, as Jasmine said, it was where I found most of my writing community. I met a lot of writers because of social media. And in fact, I met Kiese Lehman, who introduced me to my agent. And so it has its benefits, but it can also be what I call the digital Roman Colosseum. So I always advise to tread very carefully into that space. It can be quite the experience.
Well said.
Yes.
I will just add also that you can always take a break from social media, which I think sometimes we forget, that it's actually not like, even if you can't, not look, you can delete your account and then come back. I mean, Facebook, you can delete your Facebook account, and then if you decide in a week you want to come back, in a month, in a year you want to come back, your profile is all still there. You can come right back to it, which is kind of spooky that they can't hold on to it that long. But if that's your trepidation about leaving, that, oh, I don't want to delete everything, you can come back. Twitter, you can delete your account for up to a month and then come back and it'll all pop back again. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just delete my Twitter account, and like a month later, I'll log back in and then I'll delete it again and just take a couple months off. And then just knowing that, like, yeah, it's still there if I need it, but right now I need to focus, and this is a distraction for me in this moment.
I didn't use that advice this weekend. Well, I saw a chat pop up that I was actually going to go in this direction. Do you all mind walking through a little bit your process of finding your agent and then working with your editors, just so people kind of get a sense of the difference between agents and editors and what that relationship can look like?
Sure.
Yeah.
I had no idea how to get published. I had to ask around to a couple of people who I knew were published, one of whom was Kiese Lehman. And he said, well, the first thing you need to do is you need to get an agent. And I was like an agent? Like, what does that even mean? And he's like, yes, a literary agent. Here's mine. What you do, go find some of your favorite writers and find out who their agents were, Google it. So I came up with a list of about 9 agents and met with only 3 of them before I decided to go with PJ Mark, who is both my and Kiese Lehman's agent. And they're the person that you have to determine, does this person understand what I'm trying to do with this work? Are they going to fight tooth and nail for me when I go to meet with publishers and editors about possibly having this work published? They're your trusted advocate for your work. And how that's different from an editor is just the editor is who works for the publisher, and they're going to help you publish your book and make sure that it is revised to the best of your ability before it goes into the hands of readers. The agent is the person that is helping you find the best deals, who is helping you determine which publisher you want to go with, which editor you want to work with, and things of that nature. And it's incredibly crucial that you get both of those things right. Like, you have to have an editor who is your I call PJ my pit bull, because he fights tooth and nail. And then Sally is like my guardian angel. And so that's the best case scenario. Get an agent who's a pit bull, an editor who's your guardian angel.
My process was that I queried agents. It's very common in YA. You write your manuscript, you go through this big book called like Literary Agents, and you find who's looking for what. You make a giant spreadsheet, and you figure out, what each person wants. Do they want the first 10 pages of your book? Do they want the first 50 pages? You write a letter, a query letter. I highly recommend both Query Shark. It's a website run by Janet Reed, I think, and She tears apart queries, but if you read her entire, every single query she's ever torn apart, it's really helpful for how to write a good query letter. That query letter for many people is your way into an agent. It's the only way in some people have. It's the way in that I had. So you query agents, hopefully they'll write you back. They'll say, okay, can I get your full manuscript? Hopefully they read your full manuscript and then they call you and say, I would love to represent you. And then at that point you have to decide who you want to work with. And then whoever you end up with, as Robert said so beautifully, you want that person to sort of be your pit bull, be your champion. I do have many friends who have changed agents. So agent relationships change, they evolve. I've been fortunate, I've been with the same one, but I know that it's not a crazy thing to change your agent. It happens all the time. Same with editors. I've had 4 editors, but the thing that I've always sort of kept in my mind is that even if there's changes in these things, the book is something I write. The career is mine. So that's the commonality. That's the thing that sticks through all the way is that it is me. The creativity is coming from me. So I would just say that even if you have some of those shifts, it's okay. And you can survive those too, because the first time I was orphaned at my publishing house, it was not a big deal because I just went to my publisher. But then when my publisher and then my secondary editor left, I was really freaked out because I was like, oh, I'm mid-series, like how is this going to work? But ultimately, it was fine.
I had a similar process. I queried agents and ended up having offers from a number of agents, and actually like this, I went through the same when I wrote a whole book and a half basically before I wrote The Wedding Date. And so I tried to get an agent with that book, and I got a lot of agent interests and a lot of like very kind rejections with that one. But that was a very helpful process because then like going into it with my first, with The Wedding Date, I knew how to do it. So I, did the like, had the big spreadsheet, wrote the query letter, but that part wasn't stressful for me because I sort of knew what the process was and had figured it out, and it was just like about research. I was like, I can do research. And so that, and I mean, my agent is like, I am so grateful for her every day. And we work together so well. And I think it's really important to have someone who like, I think one of the things in the process of looking for an agent is you kind of feel like you're like the small little writer out there looking for the big agents. But once you get to an agent, you need to get rid of that mindset, because at that point, you two are business partners. Like, this is someone who neither of you is working for one or the other. Like, you're working together for your career. And so I know that my agent like always has my back. It's always there. If I don't like something that's happening, or if I have a question, or if I need her to fight for me, like, I know that she's always going to do it. And that is the most helpful thing, is that I know I can always go to her for anything. And so I think that is the thing that you want to know about your agent, is like, does this person always like have my best interest at heart? And that, and is thinking long-term about my career. And I think that is one of the great things about working with my agent. And then my editor is like, my editor's been my same editor, for all 5 of my books. And so we know each other really well now. And there are certain things that she, like, it was interesting because I remember thinking about this for my second book. She told me that she was trying to get something for me. And I was sort of like, I mean, okay, I'm glad Cindy believes in me, but I don't think that's going to happen. And then it did. And I was like, all right, well, I'm glad Cindy believed in me. And so I think that is really helpful, is to know that this person believes in you and your writing. And even if they're giving you feedback that you don't want to hear, or, making you make changes, it is because they want you to be the best writer that you can be. And so I think you want to know what you want out of an editor, because you can't, I think thinking of it, Robert said something earlier about like having, not thinking that any edit was like about you being a bad writer, but and I think that's important, is to like let your ego out of it and want yourself to be the best writer that you can be, and know that that's what your editor wants to.
As far as, you know, like I said, I kind of came into this sideways, so I never wrote a query letter to anyone. I was in a sketch comedy group in New York called Old English. And it was wild seeing Pat at the beginning of this conversation, because I think actually we played his comedy variety show like 15 years ago in New York, which is nuts. But we made videos we put them online, and we got a little bit of attention for that, and we got a manager. And then I started sharing my writing with my manager, even though he was mostly my manager as a performer. And then he helped me develop my writing, and then he introduced me to some agents. And then, like I said, I went into TV writing. But a lot of the good stuff that happened to me happened because me and my friends were just making funny videos and putting them online. Or like I said, that misconnection piece that I just put out there, you know, that got more attention for me than any time that I have tried to like reach out to people or submit to things, you know. In fact, most of the times I submitted to things, they didn't go anywhere for me. You know, and so like there are people who've sold books off of Twitter accounts or Tumblr pages. So there are a lot of different ways in. Now, obviously, that also is a skill and a talent and a kind of writing to be able to do that well. So if all you want to do is just write books and you don't want to do that other thing, don't waste your time. But if you feel like, oh, while I'm waiting to hear back on this manuscript, here's another way I'd want to get my voice out there, then like absolutely do it. You know, put yourself out there, because you know who knows what's going to come to you that way also.
I think that's really great advice. And on my end, yeah, I've bought books from people who have had podcasts, you know, different.
But I want to stress though that like all those people who sold books off of podcasts or whatever, they weren't doing the podcast to sell a book, right? Like they loved the thing they were doing, and they wanted to be good at the thing they were doing, because you can feel the sweat on something when it feels like, oh, this person is really selling themselves right now. They're not actually trying to create art, you know, or whatever it is, you know. So you want to do what you're doing genuinely. Don't do it because you think it'll be a stepping stone to a career that you want.
No, I think that's really great advice. I think we are actually out of time. Thank you all so much for sharing all your stories and great advice. It's just been really nice to connect, especially in this weird time. So thank you all again.
So great to hear from everyone.
What a treat.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you guys.